Hello, ladies. Welcome to this week's episode of the Hourly to Exit podcast. I am extremely excited about this week's guest, Pam Slim. Pam, welcome to the Hourly to Exit podcast.
I'm so happy to be here.
Well, we have lots to talk about. This audience loves to talk about scaling their expertise-based business, and that fits right in with what you do. But before we get started, would you introduce yourself to the audience?
For sure. So I am Pam Slim or Pamela Slim, depending if I'm in trouble or not. And I am a author and a agency owner of a certification agency. So we build certification programs for thought leaders. And this really evolves out of many years of being a business coach and advisor for service-based businesses.
Fantastic. Well, it's no surprise to my audience that I frequently have business coaches on the podcast because working with you is a great synergy between the business coach helping businesses create scale in their businesses and an intellectual property lawyer, of course. But this is a special one because I have not before had a business coach who has specific expertise in creating licensing and certification programs. So I'm really looking forward to digging in on that. Now, while of course I am a huge fan of licensing programs, obviously you are, but they're not always a solution for everyone, although some people think they are. So we're going to dig into when certification or licensing may be appropriate for a business. But before we get started, I'd love for you to give an overview of the types of licensing and certification programs that you see.
For sure. You probably get more questions than I do, given your profession. I find a lot of people might throw around terms about what licensing and certification is. So please check me if you feel like legally my definitions are accurate. The basic way that I describe it for folks is when you think about building IP in your business, intellectual property that can be methods and models and frameworks, approaches that you have to work. There can be situations where you might have a licensing agreement. In my layperson's terms, I will say it just spells out who exactly can use what type of IP for how much and how long. And so there can be certain situations where a entity, a company, an organization could be licensing IP without them needing to go through a certification process. A certification process is a specific learning experience that you set up in certain cases to make sure that those who are licensed to use your IP have all the skills, resources, information, tools they need to be good stewards of the material, and so that you can also predict more of a consistent output of people who are certified to use the methods. So you can have a licensing program without a certification learning experience tied to it, but you can never have a certification program without licensing, because when you're teaching people stuff, they need to have that agreement. The one example that I use in past client that I work with, Susan Cain, who wrote the book Quiet about the power of introverts. I worked with her for about 18 months of launching what she called the Quiet Revolution. So we had built a number of programs. One of the licensing deals that she did was with the office furniture maker Steelcase. They created what are called quiet spaces that were office furniture specifically designed for introverts. So in this case, they were using a lot of the thoughts, the IP design principles from her book Quiet in a licensing agreement that had nothing to do with a certification. But typically, people think about certifications like coaching certifications or being certified in a particular method. And those are usually the areas that I operate in with our agency.
Yeah, that is a cool example with regarding the introverts, because we definitely generally think about it, certainly in the space that I work in with experts who work with corporate clients, that we only think in terms of very large programs that are kind of serving lots of different clients. And it can be something that's just a one-on-one relationship, right? It doesn't need to be a whole program. At the end of the day, whenever we have our pre-existing materials that we bring to a client, because there's a reason that client engages us instead of the next guy. It's because there's something that we have, some asset in our business that they value. And when we are including it in the deliverable for their internal use, that is a license in and of itself. It's just a one-on-one license between you and your client. But licensing is everywhere. Like I said, IP is everywhere, but licensing is everywhere too when you are working with clients and you have deliverables. So
yeah.
Well,
I totally appreciate that, because it is something that mystifies people. And I laugh with clients sometimes because either they think it's too complicated to ever get involved with, so they learn more and they're like, oh my gosh, it's not that complicated. Or they don't realize, especially if they're building a certification program, that in order to do it effectively, there actually are a number of pieces to put in place. Or I think, as you and I will talk about a little bit later, there is a certain stage or maturity of business in which it's a good idea to be investing in building it. But just the other piece of our approach to what we build when we think about different types of certifications, we look at it in 4 different levels that really have to do with a user's interaction and use of the material. So a level 1, a certificate program, think about it like a skill that could be a self-directed kind of training experience you could have where you're learning something that you would be proud to put on your LinkedIn profile. So it could be, I'm certified to use Excel pivot tables, and you go through self-directed training, you might take an online exam, and a certificate is generally information that is used by an end user, typically in a professional development setting, that really is just to up-level their specific skills. A level 2, which is a practitioner certification, is where you are certifying practitioners to be utilizing your IP, so your methods and your frameworks, with their clients. This is typically in that area where you have a coaching certification for a particular method or approach. So you would be certified as a practitioner to be using those methods with your clients. The licensing agreement will usually spell out very clearly, can you share the worksheets and how do you share them and so forth? And that's a really common thing for a lot of coaches or consultants. The level 3 is a trainer certification. And so that often is where you are certified not only to be utilizing tools as a practitioner, but also teaching the method to others and other end users. A lot of folks are familiar with Brene Brown's certifications that she did during Great Leap. It was a big part of her business kind of pre-COVID, but in that particular certification, people were learning how to be teaching workshops so they could dare to lead workshops. They had access to materials. Coaches, social workers, therapists use some of those materials with their end clients as well. And so you can see that it's like at each level, you have another wrapper of usage on top of it. The final level, level 4, train the trainer, is often for a situation where, particularly in B2B, business to business sales, you, for example, have an amazing workshop that your client loves, and they say every single leader in our thousands of people organization should experience this method. But usually for you as the one delivering that, you don't want to be flying around on planes or training 5,000 people. So in that case, you could train inside the company trainers who are certified to train other trainers that would be in the organization rolling out the workshops to the end users. These types of agreements usually have a larger licensing agreement for the number of the end users impacted. We like those for our clients because they're often bigger checks, as we say, right? You can go from maybe a train that its pricing is all relative. It's a whole other topic, but somebody could be getting a trainer certification and pay, I don't know, $15,000 in order to get that to teach your workshop. For a train the trainer licensing agreement, that could be $250,000, $500,000. So those are ways to think about it. And so as you look at what you're trying to do with your own method, part of it is realizing for a lot of people, you could start smaller. You could start with a practitioner, then maybe you could build the trainer component. And then if you really get a lot of interest, you could build the train the trainer.
Yeah, I love that. And there are lots of different ways to dissect it. And one of the things I like to emphasize that a license, it is a contractual arrangement, and you can make it, if it is a one-on-one one, negotiate it with whatever terms make sense for both parties. So there's not kind of some standard license out there. It is the relationship between the parties. And so you can make it work for everybody and negotiate it. So
one thing I love about your experience from our conversation before is you have been inside the B2B world of really negotiating on behalf of large companies. And I know for a lot of my clients, they get very freaked out. It's very unnerving. Maybe you're a smaller shop. You're not used to negotiating with a huge company that might have a whole team of lawyers. And so I find that experience to be so important that you have, where you know how to navigate. And I'm imagining that you're pushing a little bit of the assumptions people have of maybe just saying, I have to just accept anything that big company says if they, where I imagine you're like, and no, you don't.
Exactly. I like to say that I have looked at many, many, many commercial transaction agreements, B2B agreements. And in my career, there is only one company, and we could probably lay odds on being able to guess which one it is, that said, absolutely no, take it or leave it. So long as you are asking for something that's fair, that it, makes sense, that is, you're protecting your intellectual property or making sure that you're preserving the profitability of the deal, people will absolutely consider reasonable requests for changes. So yeah, and it is intimidating to get, oftentimes these corporate clients have their own master services agreement. That applies whether you're doing consulting or doing market research or doing some web design. They still have the same MSA for all their vendors, and it's 50 pages and it's got a couple of exhibits on it, and it can be intimidating. But again, all things are negotiable at the end of the day. So.
Yeah. And I do. And I'm not just saying it because I'm talking to you. I say it to all my clients. It's why many people will come and say, do you just have a copy of a licensing agreement? And I just say, I actually don't. I'm not an IP attorney. Always work with an attorney when you're doing that final agreement, because you can really miss a lot of things. You can leave things on the table. And as you said, you may not realize the kind of leverage that you have. So just in general, I think when you're finalizing a contract, we try to prepare our clients to put together the recommendations for the attorney when we really help the client understand exactly how they want to be operating. People have very different expectations, levels of risk, desire for control.
Right.
And so that's, again, why some people they want to basically have a lawyer on retainer to be sending cease and desist letters all the time. Other people are like, whatever, you paid me for it, like do what you will. But when it comes to the final legal agreement, please talk to an attorney.
Yeah. I'm going to just ask regarding the whatever person versus the lawyer on retainer. Do you see any gender differences in that type of, just because this is a mostly female audience? Do you see? No? Okay. All right, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I do not see it in that it is a cool example of an affective characteristic that I think there are certain areas of socialization that I totally notice that have gender relations, and then to be intersectional about it. It also depends, I think, on somebody's like identity and background and so forth, that there can be a little different experience. And so level of privilege, expectations that one can have, like me as a white woman, how much am I sitting back, like worried or wondering if I'm going to be screwed over versus if I'm a Black woman or an Indigenous woman. It's like interesting when you sometimes have things in place that are related to needing to have legal grounds where you know that you can't assume that you will be treated fairly in the system. So there's some interesting things there. I do find from a gender perspective that women are less likely to think about building in things like certifications or IP protection in order to eventually sell the company, that can be a little bit more related to men. But I've seen across the board in a couple of cases of some men I know that have certification programs that have been very successful, who are like, there's a flat fee and then I really have no control over it. Like, go and do what you will. Where just taking maybe more the stereotypical gender behavior that we might attribute is where a man might be wanting to just milk every single penny out of a transaction. I realize it's a bit of a stereotype, but I haven't really seen it play out in just the experience I've had working with people.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. All right. So I thought we would do something that lawyers love to do, which is issue spotting. I'm going to provide a couple of scenarios of experts who are coming and they want to have a licensing and or certification program. And we can talk through whether or not it would be right for them. And if it's not, like what they would need to do to get ready for one. All right. So my first example is a marketing consultant who provides one-on-one services to businesses. They have fished out their referral pond and the pipeline is empty, and they don't have a robust marketing engine. They want to add licensing or certification to other consultants, to other practitioners, as an additional revenue stream to boost their income. So they want to add because they have run out of one-on-one income and they think, oh, let me add another. What do we think about this?
You sort of softball this to me, but this is such a good one because I totally get the feeling it is a natural reaction that you might have as a business owner to think, oh my gosh, like things aren't working for me. I need a new offer. And I've heard that licensing and certification eventually leads to that mythological passive revenue. The issue in this one is around market fit, where you're generally ready for a certification, where you actually have overwhelming market demand for your materials. There are lots and lots of people who are aware of what you're doing. They're aware that you have great work. there is high demand, you're exhausted from jumping on planes because you're delivering or your team is delivering yourself. That is often the market position where you've really found that market fit. People want your stuff. And in particular, when you look at if you're going to be certifying individual consultants, say, on your marketing method, generally when we do certifications, it's because we say, oh my gosh, we know that person has it all dialed in because look at how they've grown their own practice. It seems like very often there can be somebody who literally has the best IP in the world. Maybe this marketing consultant, their stuff actually works better than anybody's. You have to get the market fit first in order to be driving the sales. And it's actually harder, in my experience, to be driving certification sales if you don't have overwhelming marketing demand than it is just to land individual clients. So I would send them on a path to really be looking more deeply. If they were interested eventually in building more the certification path, they would be doing a lot more events in what I call new watering holes, places where they would have ideal clients that would be interested in their work. And then probably they'd be cranking up their own practice to try to figure out and solve the issue as to why they're not getting clients for their stuff. The other thing that can be interesting, and I do see this sometimes, is sometimes you can build market fit and the engines for that, or in some ways you can buy or sell that. And what I mean is maybe you do find somebody who's in your ecosystem who knows that your stuff is the most amazing thing. They are amazing at really dialing in the marketing and sales side of it where they can generate demand. So that could be a case where they could do a straight purchase of your stuff, or you could have some kind of marketing or sales relationship where they're pulling it in. But if you're doing it yourself, it's a big red flag.
So in this later example, then the marketing consultant is not creating that marketing engine, like they are licensing it to someone who already has the ability to reach that audience. Like
that's right. Because I've seen there's some people who just got it. I get so jealous because I'm more of a connector, a connector maven. But we've probably all seen that. Sometimes there are people who just have it dialed in. They really know how to sell and market. And so that's another avenue.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, I'm a lawyer, not a business consultant, but people think licensing agreements and then they will come directly to me for their licensing agreement. So they've self-diagnosed that they need a licensing agreement and they want to do this to train other practitioners in what they do. And the conversation that we have is basically what you said, but that you know how to fish or hunt with your corporate clients. And though you have great results, this is a new market to fish with other practitioners. Like, even though if you're well respected, but it's still a whole different engine. And so are you ready to create a new business, basically, side by side?
Yeah. Yes, it's really, really different, especially if you're selling into one, like you're selling into corporate clients. And then you want to be developing a more B2C, reaching out for individuals. It's a whole different marketing model.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. All right. Example number 2. I feel like I'm on like the dating.
I know it's really
on a
fun.
game show or something.
It's like a game show and Shark Tank, like together. I love it.
All right. So we have a growth consultant who provides one-on-one services to businesses, and they've successfully incorporated the Value Builders assessment and their other tools to create a waiting list of clients that they can't serve. And they want to license their process to other growth consultants.
Well, what I know is that Value Builder is John Warlow's product, who wrote Built to Sell, The Art of Selling Your Business, a lot of other great books. And so my issue spotting here would be maybe you use Value Builder in your own business, but you do not own and you cannot license other people's intellectual property. So either John would feel super generous and he would say, sure, take my proprietary software and sell it as your own, unlikely, or you would really have to find the thing that is uniquely yours. Again, in packaging what you do, because I know John really well and I know a lot of the ways that his model works, it could actually be interesting where you could be a certified Value Builder consultant, which is a whole path that he's done with his methods where the consultants are using that software. So maybe you have that where you are utilizing those tools and that brand recognition, but then there's some of your own IP that you could use. Maybe it's supplemental, maybe it's vertical specific, where you're the Salesforce person that knows how to apply Value Builder into a new system, and therefore you still would have permission to be using somebody else's IP. That's probably one of the things that you and I do a lot of sifting through where it's like, okay, when I start to look at the big picture of somebody's materials and they're like, oh yeah, I remember in 1984, I grabbed this model from somebody. And that's where we have to go through and really scrub it and make sure that what you have is yours, or you have legal permission to be using somebody else's IP.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like to call it, with increased visibility, there's increased scrutiny. You may have rights to do for your one-on-one clients, you may not have the rights to do for a larger audience. And so we look at the legal foundation. Let's say that your one-on-one services is a one-story building, and having a licensing program is a two-story building. Well, you need a different foundation for a two-story building than you need for a one-story building. And so we need to go back and make sure that we have the right legal foundation to build that second story on. So yeah, that is definitely one that people, and then I get the question, well, I'm influenced by so many people. We listen to we listen to podcasts, we read blogs, we read books. And so we're influenced by so many people. And, where's the dividing line between being influenced and creating something that's derivative that you need rights for? And of course, there's no easy answer for that. But we do need to make sure that we are looking at the materials that you're going to be licensing to new licensees, and make sure that you do have the rights in those. So, yep.
I have very strong opinions about this, and it's really just, I think, terrible practices that we have in general. Some of it is fueled by the memes, the internet, sharing things, where we see very deliberately sometimes like a quote. Somebody might originally have a quote that is attributed to whoever it is that actually said it, and then somebody lifts it because it's really inspirational and they share it on Instagram, and all of a sudden you lose the attribution to that. And then all the way through, as you said, to looking at methods and models that people use that really are other people's stuff. I look through the world with a lot of lens of power dynamics and sociology. And it was funny, just the other day, I was talking with one of my clients about the internet marketing world, some of these original models that were created by a lot of the internet marketers of just specific ways in which you might sell, or like types and structures you have for mastermind programs and stuff. And we were working it backwards. And I am not a lawyer. I'm using an example for anybody's lawyers who are listening. But somebody was saying, like, it works back a lot through, we look at the Dan Kennedys, like Tony Robbins originally, like creating some materials. And I was like, I bet there was a woman who originally created it that's taken by Tony Robbins, or I should, TR. If any lawyers are listening, they were like, yeah, actually that was the case, that there was maybe somebody on the team that was originally creating it. And it's like, it's why we always need to know history in our schools and in our businesses, because when often we begin to move backwards and notice the original creators of things, and this can get super deep when it comes to especially people who are in the healing, spiritual worlds. My husband is a Navajo traditional healer. You wouldn't believe the kind of things I see sometimes of just people who might sit for a weekend and ceremony, take some of the ideas that are coming from that teaching, and not just from him, from people from many different practices, and then create programs that is, quote, their IP that are coming from those worlds. So it's like, it is an area that can be really deeply problematic. And at the same time, I do understand, as we are experiencing ideas, that by definition, we are influenced by things, right? We sometimes don't even know there's certain models or ways of thinking that feels like original thought that we may not realize. But I think if we take a little bit more time and put in place the practice, first of all, of acknowledging our teachers, of making sure that we're tying back any kind of models or methods to maybe published academic frameworks or things like that, it can help us to remember that we need to be giving attribution. And then on a really tactical side, for the materials that we're building in our own business, that's where I always recommend, let's say, for example, on an offsite meeting, you might be excited to be using a tool, a assessment or something from somebody else. But in terms of your core method, try to really just build in your own IP and your frameworks so that it becomes easier to disseminate and eventually create something like a certification program. I went on maybe a minute 30.
You do that.
3-hour rant as we start to talk about it, because this definitely comes down to gender and identity when we start to look at whose IP has been stolen and who is benefiting and profiting from many of the ideas.
Okay, we could definitely do another. Yes, we could definitely have a conversation about that. But one of the things I did want to follow up on is when you do have something like, say, a value builders or some other third party materials, that the benefits of creating a niche, it makes it easier kind of to find your own layer on top of that. So, say you have a niche, you do leadership development for hospital systems. You layer that, like those issues on top of these general materials that you may get from SHRM or from PMP or whatever. You may have some of these certifications, but you layer on top of it, well, I know this client super well and I know what their issues are, and create your own IP on top of that that's specific to your niche and their problem. So
that's right. What my friend Phil Jones, who I interviewed on my podcast not that long ago, he used the metaphor for his own certification. It's exactly what to say. So he has a very specific sales methodology that's based on a book. And he uses the metaphor of Tabasco sauce. It's like Tabasco sauce can go on just about any dish, on eggs, on pasta, I guess, if you wanted it to, right? I put it on spaghetti. But he specifically designs his certification to be able to go really well with others. So it can be, as you said, this addition that won't be conflicting. And I think sometimes we think about certifications as needing to be these huge, complex processes where we have to be certifying people in everything about how to be a coach and how to use a method and all of that, where there are really powerful use cases when, as you said, you have a very specific maybe set of tools that would actually be highly complementary. And there are people, I always tease my business partner, Darren Padilla, who I love so dearly, that one of the reasons I love working with him, besides him being a genius at what he does, is he loves certification programs. The man has more letters by his name. I'm like, what are you not certified in? And there's a certain type of person that is the end user for some of the programs we build that gets so excited to be learning new things. And so it doesn't have to be something that's terribly deep. There can be really specific types of, like I said before, certificates maybe that would just give somebody an edge. And bless those never-ending learner kind of people that just get so excited when they hear of a new certification program coming.
That's awesome. Yeah, and just the one last thing before I wanted to cover before we left the third-party materials is don't forget your prior employers. So if you're coming from corporate, and you brought some stuff, even if you created it there, let's say you wrote the employee handbook at your old employer and you brought it with you, that's not yours. That is your old employer's. And so make sure you have permission to use that or create your own.
That is a whole thing. Again, you probably have specific advice around that. When I did so many years of early stage entrepreneur coaching for Escape from Cubicle Nation, that was my first book. One of the first things that I encourage people before they start their side hustle is to read very carefully their employment agreement, because especially some of the bigger tech companies that people might work for, you could be a software engineer and you could write a cookbook, but in some agreements, like literally anything that you create while employed can be the property of that employer. So before you even start to mess around with it, read that agreement and figure out the particular parameters of what you can use.
Right, absolutely. All right, our third example here. So we have a leadership consultant who walks into a room, feels the vibe, and instinctively knows just what needs to be done. Big co-client wants her to work her magic with every manager in all the offices throughout the country. So rather than do it all herself, she wants to train a Big Co personnel to provide that transformation.
So this would be a case where I would say I am walking around what we call our thumbprint method, which has 3 pieces. One of them is market fit that we talked about. Will it sell? Do you have the marketing and sales engine to be supporting this? The second component, your method, will it work? Is that method anywhere outside the amazing, beautiful brain of said leadership consultant? And I use magic a lot as a metaphor for literally what happens when you are a service provider. That's one of the biggest highs I know that I feel. I could be here at our community lab doing an all-day intensive with a client. And sometimes I'm shocked myself at what comes out of my pen on the whiteboard. Like, where did that model come from? So there is magic that can happen based on your own unique set of skills and experience, but everything about building a certification program is taking out the frameworks, the methods, so that they do not have to be fueled by you, the person, the human, the individual, your skills. And then there are 2 ways to address how you can make sure that your certified leaders are building magic with their clients, either that you are spelling out maybe some specific magic. So in some cases, like somebody's magic can be that in addition to leading strategic planning retreats, for example, that they have an amazing way of creating and holding space. They're very deliberate about it. They're very thoughtful for how they lay out expectations. Maybe they light a candle. Maybe there's all these specific things that actually contribute systemically to the types of conversations that happen. That could be something that you would be codifying as part of that method, if that is part of the magic that you want people to be executing. Otherwise, it's in your prerequisites of how it is that you have selected your certification candidates. And that's where I say you don't have to put everything in that certification program. You could say before somebody goes through my program, they already are an experienced certified coach. Maybe they have demonstrated experience of working successfully with executives at a high level, right? So therefore, you're not teaching them how to do that and your thing. They're bringing it with them.
Oh, yes. Oh, I like that. Yeah. I had a woman, it's been a couple of years now, and she is a business coach, and she is I don't know if the word is empath or intuitive. And so she kind of reads her clients and makes her recommendations based on how she reads her clients. And I'm like, well, how do you teach anybody else how to do that? I mean, that's an interesting one, extremely valuable if you have happy clients. But how would you ever not be the center of that service?
Well, and I've had some clients through the years, more on advising side, who actually do break down and codify what those skills are that they are using. And there can be certain things that somebody might say, depending upon where they're coming from and what space they work in, if it's more of like a spiritual inclination versus a particular approach or a process. I have seen it where part of a training somebody can have is what are you tuning in and listening to? And there are certain things that can actually be taught and codified. But other things definitely are just related to the individual. And so that can be wonderful for you to have that skill. But the way to be thinking about materials you have for a certification is by definition, you get excited about the fact that other very different people can take it and run with it and make their unique magic. But the part that you want to be designing for is that there is some kind of a rigor maybe for the use of the tools or the approach so that you can have a little bit more predictable outcomes for your client. So it just won't be like a wild swing in one certified practitioner's results versus the other. You can't control all of it. So sometimes you do your best job, but yeah, really look in it. And it is kind of surprising, I think, through the years, and it has been really fun as we've really dug in deep now for building certifications. It is really amazing of how it is that you can draw out of somebody things that they just thought were completely intuitive to them. And it's often the power of working with outside partners is where you can hear and see things that they may not realize. And it's funny, a typical response people have, well, doesn't everybody know that? Like, what's so deep about that? That's not valuable. And we're like, literally, that is the most valuable thing that you have in this whole process.
Yeah, I will say I've been surprised since I've been basically educating the expert space. I spent a career inside of large intellectual property driven organizations. And so IP was literally just part of everyday conversation. And obviously it's the most valuable asset. It's of course, and the number of people, once I started with posting and blogging and things about intellectual property with small business owners, and how many of them, it was just like an other thing. It was Microsoft and Tesla. It has nothing to do with what I do. I'm a services provider. And it was like, wow. I was so accustomed to it being just kind of common knowledge. Doesn't everybody know? Like, it's the 21st century. Everybody knows about intellectual property. It's 95% of our gross national product. How could you not know? We do get in our bubbles and think and don't realize how much value we can bring with our kind of skills that we have that we use every day.
I agree. I'd say 95% of people don't know anything about intellectual property. So good for you.
Yeah, well,
opportunity there.
Yes. Endless number of topics too, I've discovered. So it has been fun to do that, honestly. All right. So our last example here. Web designer has a killer trademark for her company name. As a result, sometimes she gets clients simply because people remember the name of her business when asked for a referral to web designers. She does have a good systematized work process, but the work itself isn't terribly differentiated. because of the strength of her trademark, she wants to create a certification program for other web designers.
So this could be where it is more around being very sticky and having a sticky model, a sticky name that just you can't really discount the catchiness of something when you, I mean, a name like Value Builder that we were talking about earlier is to me an example of just like a great name. We're often like, God, why didn't I think about that? That can help just by definition when you think about the model of be something that other people want. It's great that model is protected. To have that trademark on it, I think is a unique opportunity. I always think about it in the bigger picture in terms of thinking about that audience, maybe of other web designers, and also the nature of that person's business, where you're choosing to be certifying, in this case, maybe practitioners of other designers that are using that method that is sticky, and you built that brand and protected it. Are you in some ways creating your own competitors if you're not ready to be giving up your regular business? So that's the thing to be careful of. And it often, again, is a stage of maturity in business to where you say, I'm actually not interested anymore in doing most of the work myself, that it makes me excited to take this method, to have it as a tool to make it easier for others. And then your main focus becomes being the mentor, the capacity builder for people who can take it and run with it to have impact. It's always the market audience conversation that we have with people initially, where it is common that you can have a method or an approach that could be applicable for independent practitioners and for large companies. Mm-hmm. And so in that case, it really is about what is your vision for your own business model and the market dynamics. Right. And some people don't realize, there's amazing smart people out there, and you could train and certify others. And let's say, for example, they have better sales and marketing mojo than you have. Inadvertently, you can end up creating a competitor if you don't have any way of financially benefiting from that. You could be excited and proud that your name is out there, but you may not be in as strong a financial position.
Yeah. In this example, the trademark is the business name as opposed to, say, the process name. And so licensing the business name obviously would be very tricky unless you were going to get out of the business yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe you switching it over to a process trademark, the trademark applying to the process. But I am kind of ambivalent about trademarks, and mostly because I work in the B2B world. And so we have experts who come to me and they have this trademark and they're very passionate about their trademark. And I'll say, well, what kind of transformation do you provide for your client? No, do this and that. What does that have to do with the trademark? Well, nothing. It's so do you think the client wouldn't work with you if you had a different trademark? You're like, well, no, they're still it's not that they're unimportant.
Yeah.
And this is, again, I'm talking about the B2B world. I'm not talking about the B2C world. They're obviously important in the B2C. But for people to be overly invested in their trademarks as if that's some sort of magic bullet in getting corporate clients, because corporate clients don't really care about your trademark, honestly. They care about the value you provide, the transformation you provide, and that is with your methods and your trainings and the things that we copyright and not with the things that we trademark. But there's certainly value. Like if you have a trademark that is throughout the industry here, we have a web designer who everyone knows who she is because she's got the coolest business name. There's something to trade on that. So this was a harder one, just, because I go back and forth on trademarks. So,
which is why we always need to have lawyers involved in the conversation. That's right.
All right. Well, I think that was a great conversation. Thank you for indulging me with a little issue spotting there. So, as you know, this is a very meta podcast. It is for female founders of expertise businesses who want to create scalable and saleable businesses. And so I am wondering, are you thinking about building a scalable and saleable business? How do you think about your business?
Yeah, at this stage, I've been in business 28 years, believe it or not. So I get great joy. I've classically been somebody who's creative and interested in doing different things. I name myself an author practitioner, where I often write books around the things that I'm working with my clients on. And it's actually been since the last couple of years or so, where we really started to lean in to have an agency around building certifications and just really digging into the codification of IP, that I am getting more excited and we're practicing more within our own business. And I do love the idea, especially with a kid in college and another one on the way, of thinking about building that value in. I'm not immune to not really having it be part of the way that I was thinking about businesses. So I love the idea where we end up building a really powerful model and a powerful machine for doing certifications, for example, and down the road, me and my team could exit in a way that makes us all money. That would make me really happy. In the stage where we are right now, we are very deliberate in the way that we're building it, where it is productized services. We do debriefs after every single project. We do improvements every single time, which brings me great joy as an instructional designer. But it really, I think, will set us up to make it easier to do that. So that was the long answer. The short answer is yes, absolutely. I think the time frame is the thing that will be interesting to see.
Yeah, I agree. And the time frames tend to be longer than we think, but then sometimes you hear about a 2-year exit at who knows, so you never quite know, but always it's never too early to think about creating your own intellectual property. If you get some comfort out of third-party materials in order to get started, but always be thinking about creating your own intellectual property, because that's the only way you're going to be able to build a truly scalable and saleable business.
That's right.
Yeah, well, thank you. So we love to talk about creating a society that works for more of us, a more equitable society. I love to say wealth in the hands of women can change the world, but wealth in the hands of more of us can change the world. And so is there a person or organization that is working to create an economy that works for everyone that you'd like to share?
Yeah, locally, I work with RAIL, which stands for Retail, Art, Innovation, and Livability, which is a local community development corporation, CDC. And so this is an example. My husband and I opened a community lab just about 8 years ago, and we're just completing the cycle of having it open. It's been a self-funded space specifically focused on BIPOC entrepreneurs. And so in the work that we've done with RAIL over the years, they have a very deliberate approach to how they're working. In our case, with community, we are probably similar to many other areas. We're in Arizona. Anybody who's been tuned into politics know there's all kind of things that are happening here in Arizona in terms of how things work. And in our specific downtown area, we have around 70% folks of color, primarily Latino, in the downtown area, but there is really not the same kind of connection, access to resources, even though literally it's like one street away for what happens on Main Street. So I've been super excited through the years to be building more connections with them and watching the way that they specifically work literally on a person-to-person basis with a lot of the much smaller entrepreneurs. It can be folks who have mixed documentation households. It can be for street vendors. It can be for neighbors who have cottage industries coming out of their home. But during COVID times, they were working, they'd go door to door. Sometimes they'd be standing, with 3 masks on, walking through, helping people to fill out the PPP forms to get access to resources. And to me, it's combining the really hands-on approach with a very specific theory of change about how they are helping renters purchase their home so they don't get pushed out with the gentrification, and to help business owners move from leasers to owners of their commercial buildings and really strengthening neighborhoods. So to me, it is intersectional for sure. In general, women are the powerhouses in the neighborhoods who are doing so much. And it really is looking at entire families and neighborhoods that are working together. So actually, I'm going to be moving my office in conjunction with them as a next step after we move out of here in June. And I couldn't be more excited because it just fuels everything about my own local contribution, but it's also a model. It's like a microcosm of ways that I think about ways we can even be working virtually with people in community.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, we will have the URL for Real CDC I just said it too, but it'll be in the show notes as well. And so as we wrap up, is there something new happening in your business and offer you'd like to share with the audience?
I have rolling, probably the best way to access more of our public classes. I love to teach. I love cohort-based programs. So for those who might be a little bit earlier on where you're like, I think I have some good stuff, but it's not really codified, we have a class called Productize Your Service, Discover Your Unique Thumbprint Method. And that's for people who want to work on really codifying their method. I co-teach it with my amazing team Josiah Owens and Darren Padilla. And so it's a really focused, like a 2-week sprint class that is very hands-on, where we work with folks to be building their own methods, which is the precursor for certification. So we do that a couple times a year. I think we'll have that in the show notes for the next one coming up, and we would love to see you there. Otherwise, I highlight now, I started a few weeks ago a newsletter on LinkedIn called Smart IP. And so I'm writing specifically around issues related to IP over there, not IP law.
I know.
Although I'll
the
feature.
more you get IP and the concepts out there, the better it is for everyone.
There you go. I will feature people like you, but yeah, all the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, I just discovered the LinkedIn newsletter. We found it accidentally, honestly, because I was hosting in, because before I think it was kind of like an article, I think it was kind of,
Yeah.
And then the newsletter, and we're like, oh, this is like growing really fast. Like, what's happening here? Because I think they're promoting it and pushing them out. So yeah, they're great.
Yeah, it's amazing. I had avoided it for a long time, but now it's amazing. And, in like 4 weeks, I have, I don't know, almost a couple thousand subscribers. And so I think it's great to drive that interest in places where people are looking for that information.
Yeah. Perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Pam. This has been such a fun episode. I know it was extremely helpful to the audience, and I can't thank you enough for being here.
Thanks for having me.